This is Ric Alviso, and I will be talking about Cajun music and culture in this video. This is a lecture to accompany Multicultural Music in America, Chapter 6. So let's get started. The Cajun people originally came from France, back in the 1600s, and they settled in a part of Canada that was once called Acadia. Acadia is now Nova Scotia. Now, when the British came in and took over this part of Canada from the French after the French and Indian Wars, the British gave these French people a choice of paying allegiance to the British crown and converting to Anglicism and basically giving up their French identity and their Catholicism. And when they didn't do that, the Britons, the British people, expelled them. And so these people for 10 years were basically trying to find a new home. Some of them did go back to France. Some went to other parts of the French-speaking New World. But most, by the year 1765, had reassembled in Louisiana. And Louisiana, in particular New Orleans, was really the center of French culture in the New World. And these people were called Acadian because they were from Acadia. So a person from Acadie, which is how you say Acadia in French, was called an Acadien. And somehow, over the years and over the many permutations, the word Acadien becomes Cajun. So, again, by 1765, a large number, the majority of these people who had started off in France, went through Canada, had reassembled in New Orleans. And actually, since they were subsistence farmers and pretty low-class people, and New Orleans was quite a cosmopolitan city and highfalutin, high-class city, they were basically forced out of New Orleans as well. And they were told, you people really belong about 100 miles west of us. And there's some wonderful land you're going to find there where you can spread out and do whatever you want. Of course, once they got to this area about 100 miles west of New Orleans in southwestern Louisiana, they found basically swampland, bayous, and dry, high prairie land. Very difficult land to make a living off of. Yet, that is where these people settled. And that is the part of Louisiana that we call now Cajun country. So, in this part of Louisiana, they mixed with other people that were already there, other immigrants, German Americans, Native Americans, Anglo Americans, Spanish Americans, African Americans, but really the one culture that they interacted most, that had the biggest impact on their future and the future of this entire region, were the Creoles. Now, Creoles were French-speaking people who had originally come from Africa, either through slavery or as free people. And these Creoles and these Cajun people, these French Cajun people, mixed together, and that today is really the two main ingredients that go into what we call Cajun people. So, what does their music sound like? Well, the most important early instrument was the fiddle, and it was important for dances. It was a lightweight instrument, easily transportable over the journey from the old world to the new world, and one fiddler could make a lot of music and power an entire dance. So it was really the most important early instrument, particularly for dances. Later on, the accordion, which was borrowed from the Germans who had come to Mexico, the Midwest, the South, and Texas, later on, these Cajun people borrowed the accordion and incorporated it into their music. And by 1900 or so, it was a standard part of a Cajun band as well. The percussion instrument that rounds out a Cajun trio was typically a triangle. Yes, this is the same triangle that people would hang outside their farmhouse that would call people in from the fields for dinner. Just a metal triangle that creates a little percussive sound that adds to this music. Sometime in the 1900s, the guitar got very popular as well, and it changed this music from being more of a melodic type of music with a drone type of sound to more of a sound that you're familiar with these days, melody plus harmony, chords. And those four instruments, the fiddle, accordion, triangle, and guitar, is what you find in most traditional Cajun bands. Here are three of those instruments: the triangle, the accordion, and the fiddle. The fiddle and violin are basically synonymous. If you're talking about folk music, you call it a fiddle. If you're talking about classical music, you call it a violin. Now note that this accordion is a button accordion. A button accordion has buttons on both sides. The left hand plays a few different large buttons that play a few chords. The right hand is what plays the melodies. And you will see that there's 10 buttons on the right hand. And basically you play the notes that are similar to the white notes on the piano. So it's got a very limited melodic and harmonic vocabulary, the accordion does. And you'll hear people possibly in the video that you'll see in class talking about how the accordion limited the music, changed it from the kind of music that the fiddle did, and sort of constrained it a little bit. Yet, the accordion was a hugely popular instrument, very loud, much louder than the fiddle or violin, and able to play a lot of music, and it really, as I said, became a standard part of this music by the early 1900s. But again, note that this accordion that's used in Cajun music has buttons on both sides. Very different than what we're going to see in the Zydeco part of this story, where it's more of a standard keyboard accordion with keys on the right hand that looks similar to what you find on a piano. So let's continue. Where was Cajun music mostly played in traditional times? It was basically just played in house parties. Now, these are called bal de maison. Bal for dance, de maison means at the house, so it literally translates as a Cajun house dance. And this was an occasion for food, music, and dance. Seeing as how these were poor rural people, there were no big cities with clubs and big dance halls. On the weekend, people would clear out the furniture from their living room, invite people over, and someone would be able to play a fiddle and a few other instruments would be added, and you'd have sort of a spontaneous house dance. People would make food, gumbo, and they'd put the kids to sleep off in the little side room and have basically a nice little party, a nice little dance there, informal little dance. From each one of the groups that the Cajun people associated, they get different kinds of influences that affect their music. So from Anglo-Americans, they got or adopted or the idea that you find in Anglo-American music, where it's a combination of duple meter and triple meter types of dances. In Irish music, we call these reels and jigs. We've already studied that a little bit. And so a typical dance would be comprised of several duple meter dances played, back to back, and then occasionally after every third or fourth duple meter dance, you would have a slower waltz, and that would allow people to catch their breath, maybe get a little bit closer to one another, and that's how most of these dances proceeded. In Cajun music, you call these duple and triple meter dances two-steps and waltzes. And because the fiddle and accordion both play the basic melody, each with their own ornaments and rhythmic variation, they have what we call a heterophonic texture. That there is the definition of heterophony. One basic melody played by two or more instruments, each with their own different ornaments and rhythmic variation. So, to get a sense of what this music sounds like, let's play an example called Fado do Negre. In this example, you'll hear accordion, fiddle, and guitar, and this is a song that was recorded at a house party, a bal de maison. Note when the voice comes in how it's sort of high and nasally, but it's not the kind of high nasal voice that you hear in bluegrass music, which is normally associated with the isolationism of Anglo-American culture and the loneliness. Most people just feel that this high nasal voice was the best way to project in a loud, house party, a bal de maison, where people were drunk and carousing and just having a good time. So the singer is just trying to be able to sing over the din of people having a good time at this house party. Fedo do Negro means go to sleep, my little dark child. So when a mom or a grandmother says it's time to go to sleep, in French they say Fedo do, it means go to sleep. Negro means my dark-skinned one, and this is in triple meter, so you can clap to it like this. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now listen to the voice. So, that is the song Fedo do Negro, a song from a house party. You'll note that there's stars next to it. That's one of the songs that I will expect you to remember for listening quizzes and future tests. Here's a song that's just thrown in here to give you an idea of what this music might have sounded like in more traditional times before the accordion came along. That's the sound that's preferred by the Balfa brothers and their leader Dewey Balfa most of the time. This song, Parlez-nous à boire, literally means let's talk about drinking. And if you can imagine a scene at a party or at a dance where a young man is talking to a young woman and she's starting to ask serious questions and he's saying, hey, parlez-nous à boire, pas de mariage. You know, he's trying to get her to slow down and say, let's not talk about let's not talk about marriage, let's talk about drinking. Let's just have a good time. Let's just enjoy ourselves tonight and not worry about tomorrow. And if you are a young woman, your dad has warned you about these kinds of guys. So stay away from guys who, just want to party and not take any responsibility for what happens the day after the party. So in this example, you note that the sound of the fiddle has much more variety than the sound of the accordion in terms of musical language. It's able to not only play like the accordion, those 12 notes that you find on a piano, or the 7 white notes, but it can play an infinite number of notes between the octave. It can slide in between every note, and that's what gives it sort of that bluesy sort of quality. But it's also sort of a sad kind of sound that reflects sort of the hard life that people had in those days. So in this example, you hear 2 fiddles, guitar, triangle. This is a 2-step or a duple meter type song. Really, really nice sound. Some people prefer this sound without the accordion. You're able to hear some more of the intricacies and nuances of this music. Here's another example of Cajun music, and this one does include accordion. It has accordion, fiddle, guitar, triangle, and voice. And as opposed to the last one, which was a fast duple meter type song, this one is a slow waltz. And it's a sad dance song about death. J'ai passé devant ta porte means I passed by your door, and when I passed by, everyone was standing around, there were candles, and you had just died. So, note the triple meter, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, Accordion normally starts off a Cajun song because it's the loudest instrument, so it plays the melody and takes charge. And then the singer will come in, sing a verse, and then fiddle will take solo, then accordion solo, and it all repeats itself in that order. Accordion, voice, fiddle, accordion, voice, fiddle. Here's the singing. So you heard voice, fiddle, now accordion. And that keeps going on until the accordionist decides that they've had enough of the song and people are ready for another song. He'll drop a beat, and that's the signal to everyone that the song is about to end. And they'll do a quick little ending and then go off to another song. So that was Dewey Balfa along with his friends Marc Savoy and D.L. Menard. You'll see a picture of them in a few seconds. In the 20th century, really World War II had an incredible impact on Cajun music. Not only did young musicians go off to Europe and Japan and get killed, but accordions were scarce because the accordions that were used in many parts of the world were all manufactured in Germany, since it was an instrument that had its roots in that area of Europe. So Cajuns started making their own accordions, which a lot of people prefer the sound of Cajun accordions to the German accordions. It is a slightly distorted, out of tune, one-row button accordion, and has a much stronger sound in many ways. I've considered a much cooler, more hip sound than the German-style accordions. By 1954, though, Cajun music was far from being hip and cool because rock and roll had hit the scene and had taken young people by storm. So it was difficult to get young people interested in their traditions, and a lot of young people turned their backs on various folk traditions, and all they wanted to do was play rock and roll. And so traditional music, including Cajun music, went into decline. There were a few people that kept the hope alive, though, and probably the most important of them was Dewey Balfa, the leader of the Balfa Brothers. He was invited to go play in the 60s and 70s at folk festivals at the Smithsonian and at Newport Folk Festival, and there he came in contact with musicians like Joan Baez and Bob Dylan, and saw the appreciation that people still had for traditional music. And he came back basically a cultural ambassador for this music, and almost single-handedly with a few other musicians kept this music alive into the 1980s when young kids in this part of Louisiana got more interested in traditional Cajun music again. So there's Dewey Balfa on the right, and the guy with the on the left, to your left, with the sunglasses, and Marc Savoy in the middle, D.L. Menard, the three musicians you just heard on the example J'ai passé devant ta porte. So today you'll find that there are teenagers and kids that are 20-somethings and 30-somethings playing this music and basing their music on the music of Dewey and a lot of the other pioneers, but including and incorporating influences from rock and roll and other kind of popular music. So a typical full band that you might find in a dance hall would include fiddle and accordion, those two instruments that have been around in Cajun music for over 100 years, as well as electric guitar, bass, and drums, the kinds of instruments you find from rock and roll. So an example of this would be Dewey Balfa's protege, Steve Riley, and the Mamu Playboys. And here they're going to do a Mardi Gras song that hopefully you'll enjoy, and you'll hear the mixture of all these things coming together. So you hear a lot of things that are similar to what we've been talking about, but you hear it with sort of a rock and roll beat there. So that's the Cajun part of the story. Let's move on to the Zydeco part of the story now. If I can get out of this and move on. And for some reason it's not letting me. There we go. So the Zydeco part of the story really comes from a lot of the same kinds of roots. As I told you before, the mixture of white French immigrants from Europe along with African people, French-speaking African people, sort of is what creates the two main ingredients in this music. And the music that's favored by the people of African descent in Louisiana is called Zydeco. Now, Zydeco comes from a French expression, and the expression is "Les haricots ne sont pas salés," which means the green beans don't have any salt. And if someone asks you walking down the street how you're doing and things are not going too well, you might say, "Les haricots pas salés," which means the beans have no salt. In other words, we're so poor that we don't even have salt. And that's just another way of saying life is tough, life is hard. So somehow this expression, les haricots, becomes associated with this song as a result of it just being an expression that Creole people sing in this part of the world all the time. And when you're down, life is hard, what do? You have a party, you dance. So we'll talk about this expression Zydeco, les haricots, or when you say that fast, les haricots, in a few seconds when we hear a song that is entitled by the same expression. So, first, let's listen to a song called Chant de Mardi Gras. Now, Chant de Mardi Gras sort of represents a coming together of these two different influences, the African as well as the French-European. Let me just insert my example, which isn't automatically playing. And in this example, you'll hear these two different cultures coming together in one piece. And you'll hear the French influence in the second part of the song when the accordion, fiddle, and triangle come in. And the song will begin with an African-style call and response type section. So, let's listen to it. So you just heard a call and response introduction give way to a section that has accordion and fiddle. And really you hear these two big cultures coming together in this one song. The call and response representing the African influence, the accordion, fiddle, triangle section representing the French or the European influence. So let me set the scene for what's going on here. Imagine men dressed up as clowns on Mardi Gras Day, going from door to door begging for food. and pretending that they're poor. They're given alcohol and food in exchange for singing and dancing. The food will be used by the women later to make a big Cajun stew or a gumbo for a big evening dance. At midnight, the party stops and Lent begins. So all throughout the Catholic world, there's this last day before the holy season, Lent, where you're allowed to party, dance, drink, and enjoy yourself as much as possible before we get into the holy season and you have to become more serious and self-reflective. So this is how they celebrate it in Cajun country. And in Cajun country you'll find people from the French background as well as people from the African background or Creole background doing pretty much the same kind of music. This example happened to be African American Creole type family doing this example. The next example is called Blues de Basile, and Blues de Basile shows two of the great pioneers of this music back in the late 1800s, early 20th century, Amédée Ardouin and Dennis McGee, who basically are the grandfathers to both sides of the story, both the Cajun and the Zydeco side. And Blues de Basile sort of also shows sort of the blues influence in this music, which is pretty strong. So listen to this example. We'll get it started. That's Amédée Ardouin on accordion. He'll be singing in a little while, accompanied by Dennis McGee playing fiddle. Amédée Ardouin, a black accordion Creole accordionist and singer. Dennis McGee, a white fiddler, Cajun fiddler. And both the Cajun musicians and Zydeco musicians see this early multiracial band as sort of the grandfathers of both sides of this story. So listen to the singing in a few seconds and note how bluesy everything is. That's coming in from the African American and Creole influences. Blues de Basile, again, Amédée Ardouin, Dennis McGee, grandfathers of both modern Zydeco and Cajun music. But the one man that everyone would have to agree is the most important figure in the Zydeco story is Clifton Chenier, the man who everyone calls the King of Zydeco. He really popularized this coming together of the Cajun or French influence along with the African American blues influence. And the instruments you find in Clifton Chenier's style of Zydeco is accordion, which is the main instrument, but you also find the same kind of instruments that you would find in a pop or rock band: guitar, bass, drums, keyboards, full horn section sometimes. But the instruments that really stand out are accordion, drum set, and rubboard. Now, rubboard is a modified washboard. Back in the old days, before washing machine, you would have to get this corrugated piece of metal in a frame and rub your clothes against it in a big bucket of soapy water to loosen the dirt and clean your clothes. And this rubboard, this piece of corrugated metal, also makes a pretty cool percussion instrument when it's played with spoon handles or with knives or bottle tops or any kind of piece of metal. So listen for that in the example by Clifton Chenier. There's a great picture of him. You'll see that picture again in a few minutes of the example Zydeco pas salé. Zydeco pas salé means, again, the beans have no salt. And it was Clifton Chenier's first big hit. Includes drums, rubboard, and accordion. And again, it's a mixture of the Cajun French along with the African American blues, rhythm and blues mixed together. The title, again, Zydeco pas salé, literally means the beans have no salt, but it really also means we're so poor we can't afford salt and life is hard. So That means let's have a party. Here is the most famous Zydeco song by Clifton Chenier, Zydeco Pasale. So that is Clifton Chenier, a very, very charismatic performer and really one of the most important musicians in this style of music. So there you go. That is today's video on Chapter 6, French-American Music, in the book Multicultural Music in America. Thank you very much for listening.